Welcome back, my friends, to a place where shadows dance and whispers echo with secrets untold. Welcome to Tales from the Unknown, where fear lurks in every moment. If you're new to my channel, first off, hello, and second, buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the chilling depths of the unknown. You see, the world is a strange and mysterious place, full of stories that defy explanation, stories that make you question everything you thought you knew. And today, we're exploring 5 of these spine-chilling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. So dim the lights, grab your courage, and prepare yourself for a journey into the darkness that lies just beyond the veil of reality. Our first story takes us to the heart of a forgotten city, where crumbling buildings stand as silent sentinels to a bygone era. It's here, in the haunting emptiness of an abandoned mansion, that a young photographer named Sarah sought to capture the beauty of decay. Sarah, you see, was an artist drawn to the macabre, the kind of person who found beauty in the unsettling, the eerie. Armed with her trusty camera and a backpack full of ambition, she stepped across the threshold of the derelict mansion, unaware of the darkness that awaited her. The air inside was heavy with the scent of dust and decay, the only sound the creaking of the floorboards beneath her feet. But Sarah, undeterred, set up her tripod in the grand ballroom, its once gleaming chandelier now draped in cobwebs, the remnants of grandeur only amplifying the sense of unease. She moved through the mansion like a phantom herself, her camera clicking softly, capturing the ghostly images of faded grandeur. A chipped porcelain doll resting against a mouldy armchair, a shattered mirror reflecting nothing but shadows, a dusty gramophone with its needle frozen in time, each photograph a glimpse into a forgotten memory. Later that night, in the solitude of her darkroom, Sarah began to develop the rolls of film, her heart pounding with anticipation. As the images began to appear in the developing tray, a chill snaked down her spine. In each photograph, lurking in the shadows, were figures. Shadowy, indistinct figures that hadn't been there when she'd taken the photos. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Had she truly been alone that night in the mansion, or was something else present, something unseen lurking in the shadows? She tried to rationalize, to explain away the figures as tricks of light, but deep down, a knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Night after night, Sarah found herself drawn back to the darkroom, the pull of the unknown, an irresistible siren song. With each photograph she developed, the figures grew more distinct, their forms solidifying, their presence becoming undeniable. They were moving closer, their ghostly eyes seeming to follow her every move. One late night, as Sarah developed the final roll of film, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the last frame, the shadowy figures stood just behind where she had been standing, their forms clearer than ever before, their expressions filled with a chilling malice. And in the reflection of the dusty mirror in the background, Sarah saw something that made her scream. It was her own reflection, frozen in terror, the shadowy figures reaching out towards her, their hands outstretched as if to trap her forever within the frame. From that day forward, Sarah never touched a camera again. The memory of that night forever seared into her mind, a chilling reminder that some doors are best left unopened, some secrets better left buried in the shadows. Our next story takes us deep into the heart of the wilderness, where towering trees cast long, eerie shadows, and the only sounds are the rustle of leaves and the distant cries of unseen creatures. It's here, in the solitude of the ancient forest, that a young woman named Emily embarked on a solitary hike, seeking solace in the embrace of nature. The trail wound its way through dense undergrowth, sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. Emily, an experienced hiker, moved with confidence, her senses alive to the sights and sounds of the forest. But as she ventured deeper into the woods, a strange feeling washed over her, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. It began as a whisper, faint and indistinct, carried on the breeze. Emily paused, listening intently, her breath catching in her throat. There it was again, her name whispered softly, echoing through the trees. She brushed it off as a trick of the wind, a figment of her imagination. But as she continued on her hike, The whispers grew louder, more insistent, her name repeated over and over again, echoing through the silent trees. Fear began to gnaw at the edges of her composure. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around her like a malevolent wind. They seemed to know her thoughts, to anticipate her every move. And then the whispers began to change. No longer just her name, but phrases now, sentences, echoing her own thoughts, her deepest fears, her unspoken desires. Emily's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Was she losing her mind? Or was there something else out there, something that could tap into her thoughts, something that knew her deepest secrets? As night fell, the whispers grew louder, more menacing. They taunted her, mocked her, threatened to consume her sanity. They seemed to be closing in, the forest itself seeming to press in around her. Emily stumbled through the darkness, her clothes torn, her body exhausted. She had to escape to break free from the relentless whispers that haunted her every step. But the forest held her captive, its dark heart pulsing with a sinister energy. And then, just when she thought she could take no more, the whispers stopped. An eerie silence descended upon the forest, heavier, more oppressive than the whispers had ever been. Emily stood frozen, her breath held captive in her chest, listening for any sign, any sound. And then from the depths of the forest, a voice, deep and resonant, boomed out, "We know who you are, Emily." The voice echoed through the trees, each syllable a hammer blow to Emily's sanity. She had been found. She was not alone. Our next story takes place in a quaint suburban home where a woman named Eleanor, an avid collector of antique dolls, found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. It all began innocently enough. Eleanor, you see, had a fondness for the peculiar, the forgotten, the discarded treasures imbued with the echoes of past lives. One crisp autumn afternoon, while browsing the cluttered aisles of a flea market, Eleanor stumbled upon a vendor selling an assortment of vintage dolls. Their porcelain faces, frozen in expressions of childlike innocence, both captivated and unsettled her. Among the collection, one doll in particular drew her in, a beautiful porcelain doll with rosy cheeks, piercing blue eyes that seemed to follow her every move, and a mop of golden curls framing its delicate features. The doll was dressed in a faded blue velvet dress, its lace collar yellowed with age. It held a porcelain lamb in its tiny gloved hands. Something about the doll called to Eleanor a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had known it in a past life. Ignoring the unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach, Eleanor purchased the doll, bringing it home to join her growing collection. That night, as Eleanor lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside her bedroom door, and she sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She listened intently, but the sound wasn't repeated. Dismissing it as her imagination, Eleanor lay back down, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that lingered in the air. Just as she was drifting off to sleep, she heard it again, a soft shuffling sound, like tiny footsteps across the wooden floor. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was coming from the direction of her doll collection. Eleanor switched on the bedside lamp, her heart racing. She scanned the room, her eyes finally coming to rest on the antique doll she had purchased earlier that day. It was no longer in the spot where she had left it. It was closer to her bed, much closer. Eleanor slowly got out of bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. As she approached the doll, she noticed that its head was turned, its blue eyes staring directly at her. A chill ran down her spine. She had never noticed before how lifelike the doll's eyes were. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Each morning, Eleanor would wake to find the doll in a different location, on her dresser, in her armchair, once even perched precariously on the edge of her bathtub. It was as if the doll were moving on its own, its movements becoming bolder, more brazen with each passing night. Fear turned to terror as Eleanor realized the doll wasn't just moving, it was watching her, studying her, its cold blue eyes boring into her soul. She tried to get rid of the doll, to throw it away, to burn it, but every time she tried, she found herself unable to do it. It was as if the doll had some strange hold over her, some unseen power that kept her tethered to it. Our next story takes place on the rain-slicked streets of a sprawling metropolis, where a seasoned cab driver named Jack found himself navigating more than just the city's labyrinthine streets. Jack, a man who had seen it all during his years behind the wheel, prided himself on his ability to remain unflappable, unfazed by the hustle and bustle of city life. But on this particular night, as the rain lashed against his windshield and the city lights blurred into an impressionistic canvas, Jack picked up a fare that would challenge his composure in ways he could never have imagined. The call came in just as the clock ticked past midnight, a request for a pickup at a nondescript office building in the heart of the financial district. The lone figure standing on the curb, shrouded in the shadows of the building, seemed to materialize out of thin air. The passenger, a man dressed in a dark suit and overcoat, his face obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat, got into the back seat without a word. "Where to?" Jack asked, his voice gruff but weary. The man mumbled an address, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic thudding of the rain against the car roof. The address, when Jack finally deciphered the man's cryptic instructions, was in a remote part of the city, a desolate industrial area far from the familiar glow of the city centre. As Jack navigated the deserted streets, a sense of unease settled over him. The rain had intensified, transforming the world outside the car into a swirling vortex of shadows and reflections. The only sound in the car was the rhythmic clicking of the windshield wipers and the soft murmur of the radio. Jack glanced at his rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at his passenger, but the man's face remained obscured by shadows. The man sat motionless, his gloved hands resting on his lap, his gaze fixed on something outside the car window. Miles turned into minutes, the silence in the car growing heavier with each passing block. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows that danced across the man's face, momentarily revealing glimpses of sharp cheekbones and a pair of piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore into Jack's soul. Suddenly, the man spoke, his voice a low, guttural rasp that seemed to emanate from the shadows themselves. "Turn left here," he instructed, pointing a gloved hand towards a narrow alleyway that seemed to swallow the little light that managed to penetrate the darkness. Jack hesitated, his gut instinct screaming at him to refuse, to keep driving, to get away from this fare, from this night, from this unsettling feeling that had taken root in his gut. But something, perhaps a sense of professional obligation, or maybe just plain old morbid curiosity, compelled him to obey. He turned the wheel, easing the cab down the narrow alleyway. The buildings on either side seemed to close in, their brick walls blackened with grime and decay, their windows like vacant eyes staring down at him. The air grew thick with the stench of dampness and decay. The man in the back seat leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper now. "Stop here," he instructed, his finger tapping against the back of Jack's seat. Jack slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a stop. He turned to face his passenger, his mouth opening to speak, but the words died in his throat. The back seat was empty. Our final story takes us to a quiet suburban neighborhood where a couple, Amelia and David, moved into their dream home, unaware of the chilling secret that lurked within its walls. The house, a charming Victorian with a wraparound porch and a sweeping staircase, had been empty for years, its previous owners having moved out under mysterious circumstances. Amelia and David, eager to start a new chapter in their lives, dismissed the rumours of the house being haunted as nothing more than local folklore. They spent weeks unpacking boxes, hanging pictures and transforming the house into a home. One evening, as Amelia and David were putting the finishing touches on their new home office, they stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside, nestled amongst dusty old books and yellowed photographs, sat a magnificent antique grandfather clock. Its mahogany case was ornately carved, its brass pendulum gleaming softly in the dim light. The clock face was made of polished ivory, the Roman numerals marking the hours and minutes. Amelia and David, delighted with their discovery, carefully moved the grandfather clock to the living room, where it became the focal point of the room. They wound it up, listening with childlike wonder as the pendulum began to swing and the clock's gears whirred back to life. That night, as Amelia and David lay sleeping in their bed, they were jolted awake by the sound of a deafening chime. It was 3 a.m. and the grandfather clock was striking the hour. Amelia and David looked at each other, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had forgotten to set the clock's alarm, and neither of them remembered winding it. The next night, the same thing happened. At precisely 3 a.m., the grandfather clock chimed 3 times, its sound echoing through the silent house like a death knell. Amelia and David were now truly creeped out. They decided to investigate to try to get to the bottom of the mysterious chimes. They checked the clock's mechanism, examined the pendulum, but they couldn't find anything that would explain why the clock was chiming at 3 a.m. They even considered the possibility that someone was sneaking into their house and setting the clock. But they had no signs of forced entry. As the nights turned into weeks, the mysterious chimes continued, each night at precisely 3 a.m. Amelia and David were at their wits' end. They were exhausted from the lack of sleep, and the constant fear was starting to take its toll on their sanity. They began to notice other strange occurrences in the house. Doors slamming shut on their own, disembodied whispers echoing through the hallways, and cold spots that seemed to follow them from room to room. One night, Amelia woke up in a cold sweat. The grandfather clock was chiming 3 times, its sound louder and more menacing than ever before. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, and looked over at David. But he was sound asleep. As she lay there, listening to the clock's eerie chimes, she noticed something strange. The bedroom door, which she had closed earlier, was now slightly ajar. A chill ran down her spine. She slowly got out of bed and tiptoed towards the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the light switch. The hallway outside their bedroom was bathed in darkness, the only light coming from the grandfather clock in the living room. As Amelia peered into the darkness, she thought she saw a flicker of movement at the end of the hallway. She held her breath, her eyes straining to see through the gloom. And then she saw it. A tall, shadowy figure, its outline barely visible in the darkness, was standing at the end of the hallway, its eyes fixed on her. Amelia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The figure began to move towards her, gliding silently across the floor, its eyes never leaving hers. Amelia stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled for the light switch, her fingers closing around the smooth plastic. She flicked the switch, but the hallway remained shrouded in darkness. The bulb had burned out. Amelia was trapped, paralyzed by fear, as the shadowy figure continued to approach, its form becoming clearer with each passing second. It was the figure of a man, dressed in a long, flowing coat, his face hidden in the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. He was tall and gaunt, his skin deathly pale, his eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Amelia screamed, her voice echoing through the silent house. She turned and ran back into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She could hear the shadowy figure pounding on the door, its heavy footsteps shaking the very foundations of the house. Amelia threw herself against the door, her body trembling with fear. She could hear the grandfather clock in the living room chiming 3 times, its sound now a terrifying reminder of the evil that lurked within the walls of their dream home. From that night forward, Amelia and David never slept soundly again. The grandfather clock remained silent, its hands frozen at 2:59, a chilling reminder of the shadowy figure that haunted their every waking moment. And there you have it, my friends. 5 tales from the unknown that prove sometimes reality is far stranger and scarier than fiction. The shadows are deep, and they often hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. But for those brave enough to peer into the darkness, the rewards can be both terrifying and exhilarating. Thanks for joining us on this eerie journey through tales from the unknown. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more spine-tingling tales. And remember, the next time you're alone in the dark and you hear a whisper or see something move out of the corner of your eye, it might just be your imagination. Or it might be something else. Sweet dreams